Me and my friends love to play Dungeons and Dragons. We get together, sadly less often than most players do, play for a while, and then they'd usually stay the night. This story takes place on my birthday, but it wasn't a special session for just that reason. Once we wrapped up our session of Dungeons and Dragons, we were sort of at a loss for what to do. We watched TV, played some card games, sat around and talked for a bit. Then one of us, I don't remember who, brought up that we could go and hang outside. At night. I'm a fan of horror myself, and that made the idea of being outside at night frightening for me, but I only liked it more for that reason. We got outside, and I felt safe by being in their presence. Eventually though, we got bored and decided to play a few games of hide and seek. I didn't protest verbally, as there was still a part of me that was craving a thrill, but there was a small part of me that was anxious about being alone at night. So we split off, and I distinctly remember being the seeker for most of the time we played. Nothing creepy happened when I was the hider, but two eerie things happened that night during my rounds as seeker. Ever since this night happened, I've been debating whether or not the two things I saw are related. Hell, I almost forgot about the first thing that happened, but the older I get, the more creepy it seems to me. It was one of my rounds as seeker, and I was looking around my backyard for my friends. I finally figured I had searched the backyard thoroughly enough, so I moved on to the front yard. As I was going around my house, I saw something that stopped me in my tracks. A van had pulled up at the edge of my front yard. It was still running, and its headlights were on. I stood there trying to figure out why it was there. As I said before, at the time this really didn't strike me as creepy. The main thought rationalizing what I saw was that someone was driving through the neighborhood and saw me creeping around someone's house in the dead of night. I thought that the driver must have believed that I had been a burglar, and so he had stopped to figure out what he was seeing and if it was a burglary or not. But the police never showed up, the driver never left their car, and for probably about 10 minutes they simply sat there. One of the weirdest things to me is that I never saw or heard the car pull away, but I eventually walked back around to my front yard and found that they were gone. I've never seen that van parked in a neighbour's driveway or driving around the neighbourhood since then. The next thing that I saw that night was exponentially more creepy than the van, and much harder to write off as something normal. At some point that night, being alone in the darkness had gotten to me, and after hearing nighttime noises that my tired, younger mind couldn't explain, I came up with a solution to my anxiety. I would sneak inside, grab my dog, and walk her around with me. I found my friends hiding behind something at the edge of my front yard, and once I found them, we all took a break to pet my dog and relax. That's when I first saw her out of the corner of my eye. She appeared to be old, walking with a sort of slow saunter. She had a hat on and wore clothes that were leaning towards business casual. And then of course, her Doberman trotting along beside her. I casually watched this woman walking down the sidewalk as my friends and I relaxed, but then Maggie, my dog, noticed her, obviously focusing on the Doberman more than the woman. I made sure to tighten my grip on Maggie's leash, giving a friendly wave to the woman as she walked by. Then Maggie broke free of her collar. She had been straining so much to investigate the woman and the dog that the latch on it had snapped and released her. My heart skipped a beat as I watched her bolt towards the woman and her dog, and as soon as I realized what happened, I ran after her, leash in hand. Maggie skidded to a stop, and to my relief, decided to just sniff the dog curiously rather than start a dogfight. I fumbled to get Maggie's collar back around her neck, as the collar was still hooked to the leash I had her on. I apologized profusely as I got the collar back around Maggie's neck, clipping it haphazardly in a way that wouldn't have done anything if Maggie were to run off again. Through the entire exchange, the woman never said a word. She stood completely still and simply stared at me. I know it's a common horror movie trope, but I swear I'm not making this up. The hat that she was wearing was at an angle in the moonlight where its shadow completely obscured her face. I could tell though, with how her head was angled and locked into position, that she was staring at me. She didn't stop staring at me the whole exchange, just like how she didn't speak or make the slightest movement. Once I had Maggie leashed again, I remember stopping and staring right back at her, trying to see if I could recognize her face. I uttered my last apology, stepping away and still staring at the eerie figure in front of me. It took a few seconds. Seconds where she stood motionless and silent, before she abruptly continued walking like nothing ever happened. I ran back over to my friends, who had stood and watched from my front yard, and I immediately commented on how creepy that lady was. They agreed, and we all headed right back inside, all of us scared by that woman. None of us talked about it for the rest of the night, but I could tell that they were just as creeped out as I was. Since that night, every person I've told this story to has had no idea why she was acting so strange. There is someone in my neighborhood who owns a Doberman, but she's much younger than the silent woman seemed, and she's also much more charismatic and kind. I know that lady is someone I've never seen before, and someone that I haven't seen since. Since it happened, I generally don't like going outside at night alone. For a bit of background before I tell my story, the place in which these events took place is a holiday resort about 2 hours away from where I live. I've been going there every summer for years, and so do a lot of my friends from home. The area isn't too big. It consists of a few housing estates, some are better off than others, and some restaurants, a bar, and some grocery stores. The main attractions are the beach and the golf course. If you don't play golf, and you don't do any water sports, then as a 15 to 17-year-old teenager, the only thing there is to get drunk with your friends in the night. I fell into this category. Obviously, we were all minors, so we drink on the beach when no adults were around. Nearly every teenage kid did this. The golf course I mentioned runs onto the beach, so we'd all cycle over the golf course and into the beach at night as a shortcut. Anyway, onto the story. This happened a few years ago, and it was just a normal night. We got our drink on, and we headed for the beach. Two of my friends had left a couple of wooden pallets on the beach earlier that day so we could light a fire to keep us warm, so we went looking for the pallets in pitch black dark with just the moon as a source of light. Then in the distance we saw a firelight. We assumed some of our other friends from the neighbouring housing estate got to the pallets earlier. As we got closer to the light, we noticed the people gathered around it weren't anyone we recognised. There were about 9 or 10 guys, and not one of them that I could see were from the area. I know this because, as I said, the holiday resort is quite small and close-knit, and everyone either knows or knows of everyone there, even the locals. They were older kids, probably about 19 or 20. They were using the pallets we brought down to the beach for a fire. They were definitely drinking heavily. One of my friends got confident and stupidly decided to shout at them, not knowing what the consequences would be. They then looked at us and started running at us from the beach. We all scattered and started running away, knowing they were after us. I remember vividly hiding in a bunker on my own. I only realize now how stupid it was to hide, let alone hide in a bunker. I could hear them shouting, saying they'd find us and get us. I hid there for about 2 minutes until 4 guys found me. They gathered around me and demanded I follow them. I tried to run, but they grabbed me. I remember I started tearing up, but the terror left me emotionless. They brought me down to the beach and threw me into the sand. One guy then looked at me and said,
"Give me your phone and any money you have."
I didn't want to get hurt, so I complied. Fortunately, I only had a bit of change as we already bought our drink, and I had no phone because we knew we could misplace things if we were too drunk. In hindsight, this was really dumb. The fact that I had very little money seriously pissed them off. After accusing me of not giving them everything I had on me, one of the older guys said,
"Hey, let's throw him into the bonfire."
He said it thinking it would be fun, as if it was some sort of sick joke. Before I could think to run, 2 guys grabbed me by the arms. I'll never forget how terrified I was. I shouted, "No, don't!" as if it would help. I squirmed and tried to fight their grip as they dragged me closer and closer to the fire. I could feel the heat gradually getting more intense. I really thought I was going to get thrown into a bonfire. Then, out of some miracle, I managed to escape one of their grips. I shook free of the other one and I ran for my life. They ran after me as far as the golf club. I think the only reason they didn't catch me is because they were drunk and I was sober and more aware. As soon as I realised they weren't tailing me anymore, I sat down against a wall and just began crying. I was so scared. I was too scared to even get up. I didn't even have my phone to call my friends. I didn't know if they were okay. I left my bike on the golf course, so I had to walk home that night. I texted my friends and I explained what happened. We all assured one another that we were okay. The next morning, my friends and I decided to stay at home for the remainder of the holiday. We never told our parents out of fear that we'd get into trouble for drinking. I regret not having told them, considering these guys could have done this to someone again the next night. Maybe that person wouldn't have been as lucky as I was. I live in a relatively safe city in Scotland, though I have had several really odd or scary encounters since I moved here 4 years ago. I have been immersed in this subreddit for years before even creating an account, and to be honest, I learned a lot from all of the posts I've read over the years. So I have Let's Not Meet to thank for my quick thinking on this night. I'm a short 29-year-old woman and I work in a pub, so I often get out of work quite late. On weekends, I usually head home around 2 AM. I never wear any headphones when headed home at night, so this particular night was no different than the norm. Alarm set, doors locked and checked, said goodbye to my colleague, and then we went our separate ways to get home. I usually cross a grocery store car park to get home. It's well lit, and that night something struck me as odd. There were a couple of cars parked there, which is normal, but something just felt off. I looked over my shoulder and clocked a guy in a hat walking a distance behind me. This wasn't weird, but I decided to keep an eye on him nonetheless. I exited the car park to the main road that I lived off of, but I still had a good mile or so to go before I reached my flat. I checked over my shoulder again, and sure enough, this guy was walking the same direction as me. The distance between us was starting to close, so I decided to cross the road. I usually did at this point anyway. Looking over my shoulder, I was able to not only look for traffic coming, but I was also able to keep an eye on him. I crossed the road and I didn't bother to look back for a few minutes, assuming he had stayed on the other side. But then I began to hear footsteps approaching. I glanced over my shoulder and saw this guy was about 20 feet behind me. I had a soft drink and a glass bottle in my bag, and figuring I was overreacting but better safe than sorry, I stuck my hand into my bag and gripped the bottle. Another 45 seconds and this guy was close enough to touch me, but he slows to my pace and says,
"Hello, how are you?"
I ignore him and don't respond. I long ago gave up on pretenses of being polite if I feel uncomfortable. A stranger's feelings matter less than my feeling of safety in any given situation. But he persists in talking to me.
"Hi, are you going to work?"
No. I was being short with him.
"Are you going home?"
Yes, I said coldly.
"Do you live in this direction?"
I just looked at him. He tried again.
"Do you live off of this road? Where do you live? Do you live close by?"
I didn't respond and slowed my pace, letting him walk on. I was still gripping the glass bottle, ready to hit him with it should he try anything. He tried to slow down so I would catch up with him, but I slowed down so much that I was barely walking. He was maybe 300 yards away at this point, and he simply stopped and turned around, watching me and waiting for me to catch up with him. I reached into my pocket with my free hand and tried my phone. Of course, my phone was dead. I figured it would last the walk home, but the dodgy battery had other ideas. He had started walking again, but still quite slowly. He looked over his shoulder again after another minute, and I seized the opportunity. There was a path to a block of flats that was obscured by tall hedges, so I leapt behind them. I waited for nearly 10 minutes, never letting go of that bottle the whole time. I peeked around the hedges to make sure he wasn't there. I peeked behind bins and bus stops to make sure he wasn't hiding in wait. But as far as I could tell, I had lost him. Maybe he didn't mean anything by this. But if you suspect a woman is afraid of you and she is walking alone at night, don't speak to her. It will not help. Especially don't ask where she lives repeatedly. I was not drunk. I did not appear to be drunk or need any help. I was just walking home as I ordinarily would. I am inclined to believe he had bad intentions. I would rather be too cautious than not, and this subreddit has definitely taught me how to do that. So, creepy dude who seemed to be following me home, fuck off and let's never meet.